All right. So, when you're talking about installing workplace charging, it's important to understand the landscape of charging. Where are people actually charging their vehicles? So many of you have probably heard the statistic, but 80% of EV owners typically charge at home. So it's very common to, if you have an electric vehicle and you own an electric vehicle and you own a home, most of the time you will install a charging station at your home, whether it's a level 1 or a level 2 charger. So that way you're always leaving your house full charge. But then that leaves, the other 20%. So 15% of EV owners charge at work. It's a great secondary source. You're there for, potentially 5 to 8 hours a day, which is plenty of time to recharge your vehicle, to get home or to wherever you need to go after work. And then there's also public charging. So you've seen a lot of the states have an EV infrastructure deployment plan, and various other organizations are working to create a cohesive network in each of our states to make public chargers accessible to everybody. It's convenient and inexpensive. So why workplace charging? So workplace charging is a great solution for people that do not own a home. So they want to adopt an electric vehicle, but maybe they live in a situation where they're not able to charge at home. So a great secondary location is the place that a lot of us spend a big bulk of our day at. So it enables the adoption of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. It provides that midday charge to get you to where you need to be. And then it's also a really great benefit for a workplace to provide for folks that are returning to office. It's a really great incentive to get people to office, offering charging, making sure that they can get a reliable charge at work and get to where they need to be after. So workplace charging is a very important concept, and we'll talk a bit more about this when we get into the Empower overview and why it's a really big equity concern. So workplace charging provides charging access to employees who own and operate electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Like I mentioned earlier, all electric or plug-in hybrid vehicle owners do not always have the opportunity to charge at home and really depend on those secondary charging sources at home or at work and in public. So, a great, way to tackle this problem is to look at installing level 1 or especially level 2 charging networks at their workplace. So benefits for employees. It's a really, really great benefit for a workplace to offer to an employee. So it's convenient. It's obviously a convenient charging location. It's somewhere that you're going almost every day anyway. You get extended range from your day, able to go to work, charge up, and then go wherever you need to go after work. Increase flexibility in your transportation habits. It could really be a make or break for somebody purchasing an electric vehicle. And then there's great cost savings, and then it really helps reduce that range anxiety issue that a lot of EV owners are experiencing still. All right, benefits for employers and property owners. It does help attract top talent, enhance employee satisfaction and retention. If somebody's looking between two workplaces that they really like and they own an electric vehicle, this might be a deciding factor for that employee to choose to work at your organization. It of course supports employee health and well-being. It creates a cleaner air environment to the actual workplace itself. Also helps clean up the air environment to the surrounding communities where if they're in a more urbanized area, there might be more air congestion. It's a really great demonstration of social and corporate responsibility. Many workplaces have sustainability goals that they are looking to meet and really attract like-minded employees as well. Really great for environmental sustainability and great opportunity to enhance corporate image and publicity. You see in the news workplaces constantly installing workplace charging. So we've talked about why and the benefits of why somebody or a workplace might want to install charging stations, but there are all these like unknown variables and questions in the way still. So, how many chargers are needed? What's the timeline? What days and times will my employees need to charge? How much will charging cost? I think that's the biggest question for everybody. who's going to pay for it, determining who they'll be accessible for. Do you need signage? Who do I bring to the conversation? All of these questions sort of tie into the how component. And so that's where this Empower Workplace Charging program comes on. So if you've been on any of our Clean Cities calls, I'm sure many of us have mentioned the Empower Workplace Charging program in some way, shape, or form. So Empower is one of the three national workplace charging initiatives right now that are funded by the US Department of Energy. All of them have a slightly different scope of work that they're doing, but our Empower one is the first and only equity-focused nationwide workplace charging program in the United States, which is very cool, really catalyzing workplace charging adoption through outreach, workplace charger installation commitments, and then facilitating actual installation. So why is Empower important? Empower is really unique where, like I mentioned before, there's that strong equity component. So it really targets underserved workplaces. It's part of the Justice 40 initiative that's through the Biden administration right now, where 40% of the benefits of this federally funded project need to go to EEJ communities, so energy and environmental justice communities. So this is 40% of workplaces that either are owned and operated by exist in EEJ communities or directly serve EEJ communities. 40% of these benefits need to go to these workplaces. So this encourages and aids workplaces in disadvantaged communities to install workplace charging, creating a much more cohesive and equitable charging network nationwide, and especially reduces barriers to electrification for those who live maybe in multi-unit dwellings, maybe they're renters, live in a condo association, whatever the reason is. If somebody is not able to install or charge at home, we don't necessarily want that to be a barrier for people who still want to purchase an electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So the project goals here are to increase employer commitments for workplace charging programs and installation. So our goal is really to engage and work directly with workplaces, help them get the conversation started, and really explore this idea of what would it be like to install workplace charging at my office. So it increases career pathways for EV charging industry for underrepresented communities. We don't want to leave anybody behind. We want to make sure that traditionally disadvantaged communities are really being able to see these benefits of getting access to charging infrastructure. And also working on increasing access to resources in coordination with national data and utility partners. I'll get a little bit into the scale of this project and who some of our project partners are, but we've got a really great group of people working to bring this project to fruition. And then also publicly recognizing all the workplaces that are installing these chargers. It's really an important component of this project to really highlight these champions that are building out this network. All right, so project goals here. So on a nationwide scale, our goal is to connect with over 2,000 workplaces in the country. So Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire have our own goals that we're doing. So Vermont and New Hampshire are on a slightly smaller scale where they are reaching out to 40 workplaces, and Maine is a little larger, doing 80 workplaces. So we've got a lot of workplaces to engage with and talk about this workplace charging initiative and begin this conversation. Like I mentioned before, Justice 40 initiative, 40% of these workplaces need to install charging stations, and the benefits go to these EEJ communities. So for Vermont, New Hampshire, that looks like 15 commitments each. And for Maine, that's 30 commitments. And then 40% of those numbers need to be EEJ communities. And then there's also the actual installation process. So for the port, this is measured in ports, by the way. So how many cars can charge, not necessarily by station. So for Vermont and New Hampshire, 12 installs each, and then for Maine, there's going to be 24 installs. So really, this is a great step in the right direction in building out this workplace charging network across our 3 states. And so I'll get a little bit into the timeline of this project. So we kicked it off. The planning phase started back in April of 2022. really like strategizing, what kind of businesses we wanted to reach out to and how to approach this project. And July 1st started our implementation phase. So I'm sure many of you have gotten emails and promotions about this workplace charging initiative. That's because our implementation and outreach phase just started. So we're really looking for workplaces that want to be those champions and want to install charging stations for their employees. Even if you have started the conversation yet, if you're still new to the topic and want to learn more, that's sort of the role that we're here to play and help you walk through this process. And then, this project will sort of wrap up in the summer of 2025. So I'll talk a little bit about the project partners that we have right now on this team. You can see here there's a long list of really great partners that we have working with us. So the Columbia Willamette Clean Cities partners and a lot of other national partners really helped get this project started and off the road, really taking a lead on the planning process. So we've got some really great names there. And then now that we're in the implementation and outreach process, that's where the Clean Cities coalitions are really going to shine here. So there's over 30 Clean Cities coalitions across the country, which is one of the largest U.S. Department of Energy vehicle technology office programs in history. That was a mouthful for an agency name, but it really just shows the scale of the partnerships that are coming together to really build out this network. So this is just a map of all of the participating Clean Cities coalitions. As you can see, this is a really great representation of a variety of states across the country. So our three states up in the Northeast, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, are all working on this initiative together. So we all have our own separate goals, but are sort of combining our resources to provide the best technical assistance and resources that we can to you. And that being said, we have this great variety of other Clean Cities coalitions that are also doing this work with other workplaces across the country. And so, as part of a Clean Cities coalition, we can really tap into that network and provide you with a variety of resources. And I will turn it over to Jessica with Granite State Clean Cities to talk a little bit more about the resources that are available through this project and what kind of assistance we can offer.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And you ended on a perfect note by talking about resources because there are a lot of them out there. And so our goal is to really just help wade through all of the resource noise that might be out there and connect you folks, whether you're a workplace charging company, a utility, an employee that wants to see workplace charging, a business, a town that's interested. I mean, towns, cities, businesses, you've all got folks that are coming and working and being employed in your communities. So workplace charging is going to be key. So we have honed and kind of curated these resources for you that are on the slide. And I'd like to highlight, first of all, through the Empower program, there is a website that has been created that's housing all of these resources, connections, funding opportunities, tools, surveys for employees. So check out workplacecharging.com. You'll see a sample survey there. You'll see strategy guidance for how to tackle a workplace charging project. We also, through the Clean Cities program, have the access to the U.S. Department of Energy's alternative fuel database, Alternative Fuels Data Center, AFDC, which you can access at afdc.energy.gov. And there you can find a multitude of workplace charging resources, such as highlighting the benefits of it. Do you want to put together a program where you're saying, here as an employee, here's why my workplace should be installing workplace charging, highlighting that value case. There's green building certification guidance. There's workplace charging case studies. There's a whole toolkit that you can access. And then Clean Cities coalitions. We're local boots on the ground and can connect you at the local level with folks that are good contacts for you, EV 101 resources. If you need just like basic education on what are electric vehicles, what types of charging are out there, what makes sense for a workplace, we can connect you with the workplace charging toolkit, and we can help you engage other folks such as the utilities and installers and all of these resources if you just don't know where to go for them. There's also some funding and incentives out there. And one thing I want to highlight about this program is this funding is really being utilized to support and expand education and outreach. Unfortunately, it's not creating a funding opportunity for actual installation of hardware, but there's a lot of federal funding right now that's available and coming down at the federal level. So check out the Alternative Fuel Data Center Laws and Incentives webpage, which can provide state specific as well as federal level funding sources. And then you've probably heard of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And through that, there's formula funding that's coming to all the states. And that's going to tackle our interstate corridors. But there's also this discretionary bucket of funding, which has been poured into what's called the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program. And several states have applied for this funding and are hoping to use that funding to create some state level programs. So there could be opportunities there. There's also the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, that has passed recently, which offers tax credits. So if you are a business, for example, that has a tax burden, check out those tax credits for installing EV charging infrastructure. And then at the Vermont level, Vermont offers the Vermont Community EV Charging Program. So we're going to share these slides with all these links, and you can find out more there. So what are next steps for employers and workplaces? Well, we've got some experts that are here with us today. They're going to be doing some great presentations. But at a very high level, what we recommend to you is that you connect with your local Clean Cities Director, or CCD. Your local Clean Cities Director can then help you to educate decision makers within your workplace or your community, and also your employees. We can help facilitate those types of connections. We can even support you in putting on workshops and events to engage discussion. We can help work with human resources departments to develop policies around workplace charging. And we want to highlight this great project. We want to help you to celebrate workplace charging, whether it's the commitment or whether it's the actual install. Both are worth celebrating, as you can see from our key project indicators, or KPIs. We think that these are important steps. Whether if you are an employee, connecting with your workplace and having that discussion is going to be key. And if you are a workplace, connecting with your power provider or electric utility. That's step one, really. We're going to be turning it over to a utility very shortly to tell us a little bit more about that. And finally, just making that plan of action, putting the steps in place so you can visualize it and move that forward. And with that said, I am pleased to introduce Jennifer Green, who's with us today with the Burlington Electric Department in Vermont. She's the Director of Sustainability and Workforce Development. And Jen is going to provide us some information about the utility perspective on workplace charging. Jen, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I so appreciate the invitation. So thanks to Peggy for that. Hey, before we get started, I'm not aware of everyone that's on the phone, and I'm curious, I don't know, Jessica, maybe this is a question for you. Where are people coming from? Are we all New England focused, or do we have people from other parts of the country as well?
So yes, this was promoted through the Team Northern Tier territory, which is going to be Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. But all of our stakeholders do oftentimes come from across the country. So there may be folks that are with us today that are from out of New England. So if folks are interested, please feel free to put your name and title and maybe state in the chat. Tell us where you're from. We'd love to know. Great question,
Yeah,
Jennifer.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't want to be redundant, but I sometimes think even if you are a New Englander and you're very familiar with Vermont, not a bad idea just to ground us from a mapping standpoint. So I first want to tell you a little bit about Burlington, just very high level for those of you that may not know. I want to talk a little bit about our transition to net zero energy in Burlington, and of course how that intersects with our promotion of EVSE and in particular workplace charging. And then I'm going to give you some high level thoughts regarding sort of why we promote workplace charging in certain places versus others, and our work with the business community to help advance workplace charging, particularly as it intersects with what we consider our public charging and then our residential as well. And I'll conclude with a little bit of conversation on our rebate program, which of course is helping to precipitate all of this. So don't be dismayed. I know folks are a little burned out on the PowerPoint scene. I think I only have, again, 4 or 5 high-level slides to share with you. So Peggy, I'll just start by telling people, of course, that we live in Burlington, Vermont, 42,000 people. We're a college town, Closest large city is actually Montreal. The closest US city is Boston, about 3 hours south. Our largest employer is the University of Vermont Medical Center. Let's see what the next slide is, please. And as many of you know, Burlington prides itself on our sort of innovation and our business community, particularly the growth of small businesses, starting, of course, with Ben & Jerry's, which, to be perfectly frank, is one of the reasons that I decided to move to Vermont from Washington, D.C. So Ben & Jerry's, if you hit the advance button, please. Burton Snowboards was birthed in Burlington. And of course, next button, please. We're known for progressive politics, among other things. We have a very dynamic, participatory culture here, which is, for those of us that are in city government, we remind ourselves that people are so outspoken, Bernie being sort of, the antithesis or the perfect model of this, because people really love Burlington. So lots of public engagement, sometimes for better, always for better, but it can be challenging, as you know, if you work in the public sector. And the next slide, please. In addition to being an innovative hub, again, Burton, Ben & Jerry's, Champlain Chocolate, 7th Gen, and other businesses, as well as being known for its progressive politics. Burlington was also the first city in the country to source 100% of its electricity from renewables. So that includes solar, wind, hydro, and biomass. So BED, as the municipal electric utility, is responsible for that work. Given now our sort of clean grid, we are now working on our next ambitious plan, which is to transition to net zero energy by 2030. So that's essentially my job, is to help ensure that we're moving away from fossil fuels. And we're moving away in two primary sectors, in the building sector and then in the transportation sector. And that's, what we're going to dive into a little bit with our next 10 minutes together. I put this up here just to help illustrate to folks what net zero energy looks like in Burlington. I think of it as a pie with 4 slices. Efficient buildings, as I mentioned. The second slice of the pie is electric vehicles. The third is district energy, or tapping the waste heat from our biomass plant. And lastly, it's alternative transportation. So all of these things have to work together in tandem. I'm really focused on the electric vehicle perspective. Again, that's sort of that of our big pie, that's 20% of that pie, our work towards electric vehicles, and in particular, the support of workplace charging. So what's next? All right, so here we go. I want to tell you a little bit about our EVSE infrastructure thus far and where we're going from a workplace standpoint. I wonder, before I go on, if there are any questions, anything I can clarify for folks? Okie doke. What's our next slide, Peggy? This is an overview of where our current public stations are. And this is important because I want folks to understand that when we think of workplace charging, we think about strategically incorporating workplace in conjunction with where our public charging is. So you see the 19 bubbles here, which represent a total of 38 ports. You also see this blue section here outlined in purple. That's our DAC, or our disadvantaged census areas of the city. So I want to highlight equity here because it's important that we not only ensure workplace charging is spread throughout the length of our city, but that we don't lose sight of our low-income neighborhoods. And indeed, Burlington, as a refugee resettlement community, really needs to think comprehensively about equity and ensuring that everyone has access to charging, whether you're doing it on the street or at your workplace. Jonathan, I really appreciated your point in your introductory slides about the importance of workplace charging for non-homeowners. So we see this as an important theme in Burlington. So that's where we are, sort of overview of public with the intersectionality of equity. And now we'll move to the next slide, please. Great. And I think if you can just hold this image in your heads, we'll come back to it. Peggy, we'll go ahead and turn off the slide deck, and I'll just give you an overview of our workplace charging efforts. Coming back to this one later. Thanks. So at present, as I've mentioned, we've got 19 public chargers. We've got 8 multi-unit dwelling public chargers that are available to the public. And then we've got 2 level 2 we've got 8 level 2 workplace chargers located throughout the city. And this includes Hannaford's, which is the sort of the shopping center in Burlington, as well as UVM, which is again, a workplace hub in addition to the UVM Medical Center. So when we think about sort of charging considerations and workplace charging considerations in particular, arguably we're thinking about sort of seven buckets. The first is location, which is broad. We ask ourselves, is this workplace charging? And do we want to encourage workplace charging in this particular site because it's near multimodal resources? We just applied for a Department of Energy grant to increase our charging to 200 ports in the city. And one of the key principal objects of that grant was to ensure that cities were encouraging workplace charging where it was also near multimodal transit. So this is important and something we certainly consider. So is your workplace charging near, say, a car share location or the transit hub? Is it near an electric or a bike share system? This way people might drive into town during the day, but leave their car charging and have other resources over the course of the day. We ask ourselves if a commercial property owner is a 2030 district member. You know, this is a membership volunteer organization that over 40 businesses in Burlington have joined. When they do join, they pledge to reduce their vehicle miles traveled and their greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. So we're really excited to encourage workplace charging among members who are already 2030 district members, in part because they've already pledged to do some important work. And thanks for putting that link up, Peggy. We also ask ourselves from a location standpoint if this workplace charging is going to round out the existing network. So you saw our map. We want to make sure we're not clustering workplace charging, but we're spreading it in conjunction and in relation to some of the other public charging that we also have. And then lastly, from a location standpoint, I would say, does this commercial charging serve a greater public good? So we are rebuilding our high school in Burlington. That's essentially workplace charging. You've got 219 teachers or staff coming into the district, sometimes from out of town. They need to charge during the business day. Oh, and by the way, that charging then will be available when it's not being used as a workplace charging opportunity, but for the community at the close of the business day. So that's important too. The second sort of consideration I think we need to talk about is equity, of course. So we're really excited when property owners or commercial property owners in particular are serving, are women owned, or they serve, their tenants are women owned or BIPOC owned. In particular, if folks want to take a moment and just Google the soda plant in Burlington. This is a large building on one of our central corridors in town that caters to small businesses, small startups, and in particular, women-owned businesses. So this is an exciting opportunity. When we're thinking about workplace charging, how can we get more bang for the buck? Can we support more women? Can we support more BIPOC-owned businesses? And where are we going to put charging to make that happen? Thirdly, and this coincides with some of the introductory notes that Jonathan shared with us, is the demand. Who are the champions? We're not going to beat down on the door for those property owners or workplace owners who have really expressed no interest. We're really going for the ones that have already stepped forward and said, you know, we want to be a part of this transition. How can you help us? So we tend to think of those as the low-hanging fruit, and those are the folks that we're eager to get hooked up with charging ASAP. Another consideration, of course, is off or on-street charging. We've got a lot of small businesses and what we refer to as the Old North End that do not offer off-street charging. So we need to think about how we can provide on-street parking and charging that will enable their staff to charge. One of the things that we're piloting is a pole-mounted charger, which enables a space to become both available for charging or not, depending on if the cord is up or down. This is a way that we feel that those businesses who don't have their own off-street charging or off-street parking rather will be able to entice their staff and clients to drive into town to business. We consider available amenities. Again, this is easy in Burlington, in part because we're a dense community. So almost regardless of where you're going to put a workplace charger, you're going to have amenities nearby, which, as you can all imagine, is important. In certain other areas of the city, of course. Oh yeah, the pole mounted charging. Yeah, Jonathan, we can share pictures and let you know how that's going as the pilot rolls out. So being near available amenities. We also look at data from the existing chargers. What's the load factor? How much have the existing chargers in the area been used? You know, if we're finding that a particular region or area of the city is not getting the charging use that we need, we're probably less likely to encourage additional charging in that area. And then lastly, of course, just grid capacity constraints. So I'm going to wrap it up in just a moment, but as a quick review, there's sort of a couple of considerations. We're talking location, we're talking equity, we're talking a demand or who are the champions. We're talking about a consideration for on versus off. We're talking about the available amenities. We're talking about data and the load factor that we're seeing in charging stations nearby, and then we're looking at grid capacity. And all those things together help us plot out where indeed we want to encourage and incentivize workplace charging. And let me just conclude by mentioning that we've got rebates that we offer property owners and commercial entities, $2,000 a port. So that's been a nice incentive to be able to offer. I think it's also important to mention that we've got charging support for multi-unit dwelling properties as well. And we often don't think about MUD as workplace. And yet, again, because of Burlington's small size and because of the interplay between workplace charging, multi-unit dwellings, off-street, on-street parking, we're seeing that it's important to support multi-unit dwelling charging as well. So $1,200 for smart charging, i.e. that's Wi-Fi enabled charging. If you've got 15% of your units or more dedicated to low income residents, we'll add another $250 per charger. And then and or if not Wi-Fi enabled, a flat $1,000 if you're a simple multi-unit dwelling property owner. So it looks like James is ready to take it from here. Thanks so much again, Peggy. And if folks have questions, I'm happy to share more news and information.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a great, like I said, comprehensive utility perspective and kind of highlights the importance of reaching out to your electric utility and creating that partnership there. So I appreciate that perspective. And now I'm pleased to introduce James Penfold. He is the Director of E-Mobility Solutions for Revision Energy. Revision Energy, you may be familiar with as a solar company and also as an EV charging installer. James brings a great perspective here in New England in the Northern Tier to the installer's perspective on how to get this workplace charging project off the ground. So James, go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you. Can you hear me okay and see my presentation okay?
Sure can. Thank you.
Great, great. Well, thanks so much for having me this morning, everyone. And that was great to hear from Burlington Electric. I got to be honest, I've used their public charging before, and it is one of the best, I have to say. Great charges and great rates too. I didn't want to leave and come home and charge on my central main power bill. So no, I can see that they're doing great things. Very progressive company. It's great kind of segue from the macro grid perspective down to a more granular level of what I'd like to talk about with our experience of our initial contact with companies, organizations about workplace charging. So just kind of a quick intro to the company. If you haven't already heard of us, many have, so I won't bore you with the details, but Revision Energy, been in business 20 years. We're now 400 plus employees. growing at a phenomenal pace. We're an all-employee ownership company. We're a certified B corporation and among top 5% in the world for how we get ranked for that, for best companies for the world. We are a leading New England solar installer, both residential and commercial, and we're also EV charging specialists and battery energy storage specialists. So we've got this small and rapidly growing EV team within the bigger PV team. We've got all those resources for us. So, what I wanted to walk you through today was 3 key considerations when you are planning your workplace charging project. Firstly, grid connection and power availability. So basically going from Burlington Electric at the pole and taking it from there to the actual plug. And then secondly, networked versus non-networked charging. And then thirdly, power management through the charging stations. So first one, new grid connection versus an existing grid connection. So the first thing that we find when we go into do a site visit with a company is we take a look in their electric room, which is kind of this dark dungeon where nobody usually goes. But it's probably where we all need to start the process. So it turns out EVs were never planned when 99.9% of buildings were designed and constructed. So over the years, you've got this electrical panel that they thought that they were oversizing it at the time, and they got enough space in there for adding on some extra circuits. But over the years, those extra circuits have been added to, and as we electrify everything, we're going into these rooms and we're finding that either the panels are chock full of breakers and there is literally either a space for a couple of plug circuits, or there may be some space, but overall the electrical the power load is going to exceed what you've got coming in from the grid. So what we're finding at this time, 5 years ago, if we'd been having this webinar 5 years ago, we'd be talking about adding a couple, maybe 2 or 4 plugs. We could do some power sharing, and maybe squeeze some circuits into an existing panel. But the good news, the good problem is that the horse has left the barn, and EVs are not going away, and they're just going to keep growing. So we need to plan for the future. So what we're advising clients is to consider a new grid connection, dedicated grid connection. Why would we do that? In addition to being able to offer that dedicated power, we can put in a new panel that's got plenty of space for what you need now and for future expansion. We're finding that, furthermore, you might find your existing electric room is actually not convenient to where you want to put these chargers in your parking lot. So it might require going across a building, punching holes through walls and trenching across asphalt. With a new service, there's every possibility that we can put a pole, the utility will put a pole closer to where we need these. So there's minimal disruption, and we can just put these in a part of the parking lot where you've got plenty of room for expansion. So, that's going to give you that future-proofing capability. The downside is you are going to pay a little more upfront for doing that, obviously, because we've got to put in this new panel, and you've got to potentially pay the utility for that new service. One thing I will say is we are learning that in some jurisdictions, the utilities might have a lower cost or actually no cost for a single phase a new connection. So second priority that we like to discuss with new clients is network station versus a non-network station. And what do I mean by that? So a network station is one that's connected to the internet, and a non-networked, it has no internet connectivity. So the pros of a network station is that we've got all these driver management features. So you can limit charging to employees only, so the public can't come in and use it off hours without you knowing and adding to your bills, or hogging the charges when you want them reserved for your employees. You can set fees, so you can actually, you might have employees that don't like the idea that their co-workers are actually getting free so-called gas, right? They're paying their gas. Why should their co-worker be getting a free charge? So you can actually, add, maybe you're just getting cost back on what you pay the utility. And then overall, you can increase the utilization of those stations. There's many features, so you can add a reservations feature so that someone can book their time every day between 9 to 12, let's say, and then they move their car and someone else can come in for the afternoon. Or you can just do a wait list, so you just come up to the charger and just tap your phone, and it acknowledges that and puts you in line, and then text message gets sent to the person that's already charging. When they finish charging, they get a nice polite message that says, please move your car, someone else is waiting in line. The downside of network charges is they're higher cost up front, and they do have an annual network subscription. So non-networked benefits, just plain simple, which means to say less things to go wrong on them. When you're using them, you don't need an RFID card or an app to initiate a charge. It's what we call just plug and play, plug and charge. It's easier for the driver, easier for management. And then, of course, they are significantly cheaper, and they have no internet connectivity, so they don't have any kind of data plan or subscription fees with that. Downside is, of course, that there are none of those nice features that I just described for the network chargers. So they have limited power management capabilities, which I'll get into that in a second. But what that means is that you're going to be limited on how many circuits you can put into a panel. So if you are trying to so-called shoehorn circuits into your existing grid connection with your panel, you may find that you're limited to maybe just 2 or 4 plugs. Whereas networked, we can do some power sharing and get more from that limited amount of power. So overall, up front, you'll find lower cost, lower operational costs. However, it's going to limit you down the line. So it could well be something that bridges you to that network at a later time. So then the third consideration, is I just alluded to, is power management considerations. So overall, this is something that's going to allow you to get more from less. So you can take that limited amount of power you've got, and that could be a new service, for example, and you're starting now with a 200 amp service, and you want to add a dozen chargers. That could be at full power, 400 amps, so double what you have the capacity for. But if you have power management, you can start sharing that power between those dozen ports intelligently. So The other benefits are it could take advantage of utility time of use rates. So you can structure when cars get charged. So everyone comes in at 9 in the morning, they plug in, and that's the best time to charge. So the lowest rate, shall we say, from the utility. You want to get everyone charged up to midday. Then maybe there's some mid peak rate, and you want to just limit that load so you don't incur your highest costs during that time. And you could even set it so it literally doesn't charge during what we call critical peak. There's I won't get into it today, but utilities have something called a demand charge, which is basically the peak amount of power at any one time during a 15 or 30-minute period. So you will get charged for that at that rate, even if you hit that just for 30 minutes. So by having a power management feature, you can knock that down so that you spread it out wide across the day, since you've got maybe 8 hours while people are plugged in. So then that's what so you've got 8 hours, so there's no need for everyone to receive, charge their car within an hour of arriving and plugging in. So bottom line, that power management is going to allow you to maximize the number of cars that can be simultaneously plugged in. And I'm just going to emphasize the word plugged in because, as I say, everyone arrives, let's say at 9 a.m. They all plug in, walk away. Some of those cars, maybe the first ones that arrive, those can start charging initially. And then when they finish charging, it'll send the juice to the other cars. And at the end of the day, everyone gets in their car and they're happy to see that they've recovered, let's say, their 50-mile commute. So lessons learned, revision, we like to talk the talk and walk the walk. And a little kind of our background, we have been adding chargers over the last 8-10 years. We added a Nissan Leaf, one of the earliest ones, and a charger that was drawing a minimal amount, similar to what a electric clothes dryer might be drawing. Not a problem. Then we started adding some Chevy Bolts to our fleet. A couple of employees started arriving with their Tesla Model 3s or Chevy Bolts or whatever, and we start adding more chargers. We reached about a year ago capacity of our existing service, our existing panel. So we had to explore some options, and we settled on a network charging product and service by a company called Evercharge. And what that does, it allows us to be able to power share between a dozen chargers, and essentially it will go from anything like plugging into a 110 outlet at home where it's delivering maybe 3 or 5 miles of range an hour, up to a typical level 2 charger that will be giving you, let's say, 25 to 30 miles of range an hour. But overall, throughout the day, everyone's happy, they're getting the charge they need. So we have a dozen of those chargers, and that's something that we're also monitoring the back office for the data. And it's difficult to kind of see here, but some of these this data here is telling us how many hours people are charging for, how many kilowatt hours they're using, and what time of day. And this graph here is going to show you where those peak loads are occurring. And if you take a closer look at this, you'll find that most people are receiving a full charge within a couple of hours. So you can do a lot with all of those charge sessions in spreading that load throughout the day. So that's something that we're learning by doing ourselves. So wrapping it up, workplace charging, as everyone has said on this call, it's a valuable tool for recruitment and retention, with the caveat that when it's available and when it's convenient, and having some of those those considerations of, you know, power availability, being able to monitor the data and increase utilization throughout the day, control access. All of those features and many more can help you make them available and convenient with less investment, if you will, and less plugs. So that's kind of the goal, is to do more with less. And bottom line, you know, I got a picture of our all of our employees at our company picnic a few years ago. There's probably half of what we have now, but you know, the goal is for all of these folks to be able to drive and plug in with an EV, and we are working toward that now. But it requires, we certainly wouldn't be able to give everyone full power when they plug in. The Burlington Electric would probably see their lights start to dim. But anyway, that's I look forward to any questions you might have, and happy to, you know, if anyone's got any questions offline, I can point you in some right directions. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So I have a couple of questions. Thanks also to folks in the chat who were responding to questions. So this goes maybe to James and to Jen Green. You talk about network versus non-networked. We look at our workplaces who are trying to figure out where do I start? Level 1, level 2. We hear so much about DC fast. We talk about load management, as you mentioned. So in a non-networked system, while there are lower upfront costs, you don't have the flexibility to manage some of the charging, as you mentioned. Now, for a workplace, does that mean if I owned a business, what would my responsibility be for maintaining that and providing that service and being aware so that I don't get big demand charges as a result of offering workplace charging? Can either one of you or both of you address that?
Sure,
Yeah, go ahead,
I'd be
James.
happy. Yes, so networked chargers, like I say, they're going to be more expensive up front, and there's a great range in price, I've got to say. And in general, you get what you pay for. So, you know, I know that Burlington Electric installs or has installed charge point stations, which is what we also offer those as our kind of top shelf product. Those ones, you're going to pay for an extended warranty and operations and maintenance plan up front. You know what your cost is going to be, and they're extremely reliable in our experience. You're going to pay an annual network fee of about $250 per plug per year. So that might be too much for some people, but it will allow you to be able to manage your demand charges by, you know, and time of use rates, for example. You can bill people, so you can make sure that you're not having people use them unnecessarily. I mean, one thing I didn't mention in my presentation, which I think is kind of a key consideration, is some people come to live in a single family home that they own, and they've got a garage and they've got a charger in there, and it's incredibly convenient and inexpensive for them to charge. When they arrive at work, they shouldn't, to be equitable, they shouldn't be hogging a charger if that's the only plug available, when you've got someone who lives in a rented apartment who doesn't have access to a charger, and they need that workplace charger. So if you're only going to put in enough chargers for the folks that really need them, if you are billing for that charge session, it helps filter out the people that need it versus those that don't. You know, the person that's got their home charger. Non-network charger, great initially. They're inexpensive. You're not going to, if you get the right one, we install Clipper Creeks. They got 5-year warranties. There's not much to go wrong with them. The only issue is if you were to put it in a place where it has access to a lot of public, you can expect that somebody's going to come and use it. So you are going to, there's strategies around that with signage, and so there's a lot you can actually do, and you can put timers on them so people don't use them after hours. So there are actually some workarounds.
Jen, do you have anything to add?
I would add that in one circumstance in Burlington, we're really excited about the network charger because it allows it to be a true workplace charger during the business day. And then in the off hours, it allows for public use. So this flexibility is really important, particularly, as James mentioned, for folks that don't own their own homes and have their own garages and easy places to charge. We've got to make charging equitable, and this is one way by which we can do that.
I'll just add to that, Jennifer, we own and operate our own chargers in Concord, New Hampshire. And I actually manage them at the back office, and I offer a reduced off-peak rate after 5 o'clock. So they're right opposite Congress, so they're packed during the day. So I offer an incentive, and we're starting to see people charging overnight now from the neighborhood, which is nice.
Right. Well, thank you both. We only have a couple more questions. So if you have more questions in the chat, please go ahead and ask. So, questions come up about technology, and we talked a little bit about future proofing. Sam, I'll get to you in just a sec. So think about future proofing, and I'll get to Sam's question. Can you unmute yourself, Sam? Sam Lash from Central Vermont.
Oh, sure, but I didn't mean to interrupt. Please, by all means, finish what you were saying.
Okay, so what then, what then should a workplace really consider as far as the appropriate level? And again, that future proof, where is charging going in the future as far as, and we just saw several of the vehicle manufacturers go ahead with like the Tesla charger. How do we know, remember when cell phones first came about, what should we anticipate, and when should a business start taking this step and take it confidently that they're not going to, get a Betamax and VHS is going to be the way for anyone over a certain age? Jen, any thoughts on what BED recommends as far as dealing with their workplaces and what charging system to go with? Level 1, level 2.
Yeah, it is on an, ads needs and case by case basis. I don't know what James' experience is, but for us, and again, small city, small utility with a lot of emphasis on customer care and service, we really work with each property owner to try to ascertain what's best for them. Cost, demand, availability, number of potential employees, the degree to which it will be used at night. So it does depend. I think on a personal note, I'll say that I hadn't imagined that it would be worth investing in a level 3, a super fast charger. We just installed one here at work as a workplace charger. It's gotten more use in the last 24 hours than the total number of our level 2s in the city. So it's quite extraordinary. I think what we're seeing, people coming in, charging quickly and leaving, and that's exactly what we want. Can folks afford a level 3? Not likely. However, with federal money coming down the pike, it might be worth considering. So I guess from my perspective, to sum it up, it really depends on a case by case basis. You want to talk with your utility and get the help you need to make the best decision for your particular situation. What do you think, James?
We like to look at, first of all, how many miles driven is that use case looking to recover? Battery, kWh. So kind of work back. So if it's someone that needs, they got a 50-mile round trip commute to work, look at, what that average is for your employees, and that kind of informs the level of charging you need. So we're finding level 2 is the sweet spot. There's no question. And within level 2, there are certainly slower and faster models, right? So my recommendation would be to install something that is capable of the highest level 2 speed, and they now have some, actually, the Ford F-150 Lightnings that are close to DC fast charge speed, but you only need to use a single phase utility connection, which is significantly less money to install. The equipment is less money, but anybody can plug into it and use it. Using the power management functions within a network charger allows you to take it from anything from like a level 1 at 2 kW all the way up to 19.2 kW. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. And I mean, yeah, DC fast chargers are a lot of fun, Jen, and I totally agree. I mean, in some cases, you might just say, instead of doing 50 level 2s, let's just do a couple of DC fast chargers. So there's, and just allow people to come in, get a quick charge, and then move their vehicle. 15 minutes might be enough, as opposed to asking someone who's in a meeting to come out and move their vehicle at lunchtime, that kind of thing, so that someone else can charge. So my recommendation is to start with how many miles are people driving a day and how much of a battery charge they're looking to recover.
Right, and we so I just indicated the workplace charging website for Empower. There is a survey on there for employers to share with their employees to get a sense. So again, getting as much information as possible before you start plunking in this infrastructure. So Sam, do you want to ask your question? Are you still here?
I am. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hi, all. Sam Sheehers from Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. Thank you so much for this. It's really great to just get a little bit of insight into how you are all dealing with and developing some of these larger programs. So it's great to sort of just hear some of the thought process behind things. I guess this question is for everyone, but also maybe particularly for you, Jen, around sort of the equity piece. I found that a lot of the indices that are coming out, both at the state and federal level, including those behind Justice 40, are underpinned with ACS data. So the resolution is quite coarse. So when you approach, planning for Burlington, what are the other metrics that you're using? And also, how are you building that sort of ground up data, or are you using ACS data for especially a lot of our smaller towns that may not sort of qualify the town level? We really want to be able to provide them some insight into, like, okay, but what could you look at if you're interested as a town? What should you be looking at in terms of equity that isn't really going to be captured in a lot of that course approach? So I don't know. Yeah, any insight you have there would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Jen, you're muted.
Sorry, Sam. So nice to hear from you. I don't know how much it applies outside of Burlington, but we really look at sort of from a multifaceted perspective, from a workplace standpoint. So we're talking about knowing where people live and where they work and their demographics. Are they English speakers? Are they not? Are they renters? And really taking all these things into account when we think about where we're going to put charging. In the Old North End, which is our densest neighborhood, of course, where most of our new American population lives, this is where we're going to focus attention, not only because of the small businesses that are there, because of the density of residents. We're thinking about places like the high school, which allows, of course, for this intersectionality between students and students of color, and the vicinity to the Old North End and lower income neighborhoods. Is that what you mean, or do you want to talk a little bit more about what you had in mind?
Yeah, no, I just was sort of wondering about the source of like, do you have a guiding principles? Do you have a list of key metrics with data sources, or is it coming out of those conversations just site specific, case by case by case by case? So when approaching, how to help folks have these conversations, obviously ideal if, one of us or more of us or whatever can be in every single room, but that's not always the case. So, really helping walk people through those considerations and where they can find that data if they don't. Obviously it's a learning experience to look around the room, understand what perspective you're missing, but then next steps after that is actually trying to do something about it, and sometimes having those basic model of how folks are able to do that. Is it polling at the local baseball game or whatever? Just sort of what is your sort of more formal when you pitch it, in one of these grants or whatnot. What does that look like?
I don't know if this really answers your question, Sam, but I will tell you this, that we've just hired an equity specialist whose job it is to spend time in the neighborhoods. So Ita sets up shop in a laundromat one day a week, for example. And we're going to use this opportunity to hear from folks about where they want chargers. We're going to be doing community surveys and focus groups as well to help ensure that we're putting chargers where people really need them. I can say that the last time we put in one of the last times we put in a workplace charger, we asked the community to vote on where that charger should go. The next time we do a survey like this, we're going to make sure that we're doing it not just online, but face to face and use paper as well. So just constantly thinking about how we can ensure that we're hearing from as many people as possible, regardless of a language spoken at home.
I'd like to add to this conversation, Sam, we also through the Empower program, through Department of Energy, have layers and layers of maps that we go through. If there were a site that were selected to see if it complies with the Justice 40 metrics, and we use you can start with A-Travel from Argonne National Labs, and going down to who works there, looking at air quality, looking at the cost of vehicle ownership in your area. So I'm just kind of, quickly looking at Montpelier, and, depending where folks are coming from, your vehicle ownership costs are almost $6,000. So that in relationship to income, again, the business owned, who are the employees of the business owned. So there are lots of layers that we can assist with in identifying where your disadvantaged communities are. With all three Northern New England states, we are historically more white. We think of disadvantage differently here. And it's, Burlington, Manchester, New Hampshire, Portland, they have their immigrant populations. And then we look at our rural areas where there is a higher vehicle ownership burden. And we don't necessarily think about air quality in the same way that we do in larger cities. We do have air quality issues here as well. So looking at any kind of particulate matter, depending where folks are live, say, right in downtown Rutland, would be higher than other areas, just for example. So does that answer? I can throw things at you, probably after this call. Happy to show you some of the tools. Another question. Sorry, I opened too many tabs here. Well, thanks, Jessica, for putting that in there. Talking about installing these workplace chargers. If a business, whether they own or whether they rent, how to get the landlord to buy into the installation, that's certainly a negotiation. But how will EV chargers affect property values? Have you seen, any kind of pros or cons about adding EVSE in property values as far as then buying and selling?
I can't say I've actually got any evidence of that, but anecdotally, it has to add value. I mean, unless you're going to be burdened with a non-network station that the public are plugging into and not paying you for. But if you're a business, if you're a restaurant, and it's attracting people to your business, or even if you were talking about workplace charging, it's retaining or attracting talent. That's an asset. There's no other way to slice it as far as I'm concerned. I don't see any negative really, other than, like I say, you've got public using it and not paying for it, and it's actually negative. It's not what you want. Those are people that aren't visiting your business.
Jen, any comments in Burlington?
You're muted, Jen.
Yeah, no, nothing to add.
Okay.
James said it well.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. So I don't want to beat the network versus non-network with a stick, but one more question about this. Really looking, or maybe it's the relationship that a workplace has with a network provider and the upkeep of the station. How long do those, if you have a networked station, how long are those service agreements? What's the flexibility on those? Because it is something that requires maintenance, and there's nothing more frustrating than thinking that you're going to be charging at work or charging at the Hannaford, and you get to the grocery store and realize like the charger's broken, and the Clipper Creek on Shelburne Road in South Burlington. I was like, who do I call about this? So those pieces, how does a workplace address those in a contract or relationship with a provider?
Yeah, that's critical. I mean, it's almost better to not have a charger than have one that's broken. You know, I mean, on the plus note, everybody I'm sure on the call is familiar with PlugShare, and it's like the Yelp of EV charging. So it's almost self polices the stations that might be unreliable, forces them to kind of pay attention and keep them up. And I monitor it actually as an owner manager, our stations with PlugShare. And I mean, you can set it up so it sends you an alert when someone posts a review, and that's usually a tip off when something's not working. But as far as the network stations, they usually come with a 3 to 5 year warranty, parts warranty. You can add on top of that a labor and parts warranty up to 5 years. So that would cover you for having us drive from the seacoast to Burlington to fix a charger, and there's actually uptime requirements with it as well. That would be ChargePoint. The other networks out there are also coming along with uptime guarantees. So the other solution is we offer service contracts. Revision does. So we would never just hand keys to someone and say good luck. We're always there as a trusted partner. So I would say working with an installer that is going to do it well to begin with is number one. And I'll just mention, shout out that there's actually requirements from the federal Department of Transportation that goes along with a lot of the money that's coming down the pike, that the installer has to be certified as a trained EV charging station installer, and it's pretty specialist, the training. Revision has it, and that way it's gonna make sure that it's done right to begin with. And I can't say enough for that, because a couple of years down the road, that's when you see issues come along with water getting in and stuff like that. So I would say look to the partner that is gonna install it, and cheap is just like anything.
You get what you pay for.
What you pay for. What's
Thanks.
that?
I said you get what you pay for.
You totally
Thanks,
do.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I want to go back up to the chat. I think Jen, you answered quickly there. Tad Montgomery asked about an EV SE owner maintainer Can police shared charging stations so people don't park there after charging? What do you recommend? And Jen, you recommended an idle fee. Can you just a word or two on what that idle fee could look like or does look like?
Sure. I mean, it's very simple, but if you're a network charger, you can set a time by which people have to move. Otherwise, they're charged an additional, $1 an hour, just enough to have people think about, ooh, my time's up. I got to move my car. And we're seeing that pop up more and more. James, I'm sure you have a lot of experience and can talk about the technology by which that happens. But an idle fee seems to be a pretty simple fix.
Okay, so
You're absolutely on. You're correct, Jennifer. I know your charge point units that you're using. They have that feature. It's what we use to kind of give people a gentle nudge, and you can say you get a text message that says your car finished charging. Please move your car in the next 30 minutes, or you'll be charged $1 an hour, $5, whatever. So you can be kind of gentle about it until you find that you need to get a little more, strict about it, if you will. Signage. I think signage is just so important. I mean, to stop what we call icing, right? Internal
right,
combustion engine. So investing that little extra to put some paint, some painting on the ground that says EV parking only, put that sign up there that says parking while charging only, and if there is some ordinance, maybe you can say violators will be towed. I think those days of us being kind of polite and accommodating with EV drivers is coming to an end. We're getting to the masses of the market where people abuse things. So we kind of need to look out for the people that are going to want to use it courteously, if you will.
thank you. Thank you. So Tad, I hope that answered the non-network thing, signage and towing. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to introduce Sydney Hunter, the intern for Maine Clean Communities. Sydney, do you want to jump on and explain Jamboard to us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a Jamboard coming on. It's a good way to do community engagement. So we're just going to ask 1 or 2 questions on the Jamboard, and I can go ahead and drop the link to that in the chat. And then just click on the link, and you'll be able to add a sticky note for the different questions that we're going to ask. And then you can kind of just see like the responses that everyone's going to have. So if you go ahead and click that link, it should take you to the Jamboard, and we can answer our first question on there, which is what barriers to installing workplace charging do you feel that you've encountered or would encounter? And then when you're finished with that one, you can go ahead and skip to the second slide and your biggest takeaway from today's webinar or any additional questions that you would want to have answered in a future webinar. And then to access those sticky notes, just click the little square on the left panel, and then you can type whatever your response might be to the question. Just a good way for us to get feedback and understand what you all took away from the webinar today.
Sydney, do you want to share your screen so we can see the responses getting added?
Sure. Did that work?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, perfect.
A lot of demand charging, network, non-networked, staff capacity, cost. Cost always seems to be the underlying factor. Chicken and egg problem, assuming drivers don't want charging, but because there's just no EVs, but without charging, people don't feel confident enough to adopt an EV.
I wanted to jump on real quick and just kind of highlight. So, the Empower Workplace Charging program that we've been talking so much about, although there is no funding tied to that program to support installations, this is a program that's funded at the US Department of Energy level, so the federal level. We anticipate that as we're able to show interest from workplaces, towns and cities, communities in workplace charging, that could potentially impact future funding opportunities that come through the US Department of Energy level. So we're really trying to show that there is a demand, no pun intended, for charging, and potentially that could impact future funding opportunities. So just to keep in mind.
Yeah, and also highlighting that starting these conversations now, engaging with your utility providers and your employees, and really having these conversations about what workplace charging can look like is a perfect way to start and set up your business or organization for when these funding opportunities go live. So we're expecting, Jessica had mentioned the Charging, Fueling, and Infrastructure Grant Program, which, we will likely find out end of 2023, early 24, what that will look like. And having these conversations now and getting the plans in place can position your workplace perfectly for taking advantage of those funding opportunities once they come up.
And
And,
then, go ahead,
yeah,
sorry.
I was gonna say this is a lengthy process, so the sooner you can have the conversations and bring people to the table, the better.
Yeah, it's all about teeing up this process. You know, Jen Green talked about, it's really individualized based on, who your community is, where you're located, what the power looks like. And think of the Clean Cities directors. We're part of this Empower grant. We can serve as, your consultants on these projects to get things set up either for the funding that's, any funding certainly in Vermont that's open right now, or some of the CFI or future funding. So we can serve as free consultants for the workplaces that sign a commitment letter to tee you up to help with identifying what are your, again, it's 40% of our projects need to fall under EEJ. And we can go through our metrics, identify, we can help with surveys to gather information for you and for your employees, or talk to an employer if you're an employee interested in starting this conversation. So lean on us, utilize us as resources.
And thank you to everybody who has responded to the Jamboard already. This, will really help us gauge the resources and technical assistance that we can then turn around and provide back to you guys. Sydney, do you want to go to the next one and just see what people are? Okay, so yeah, there is a second Jamboard question for people that are still on. What is your biggest takeaway from today's webinar, or additional questions you would like to have answered? This webinar will be recorded and publicly available for everybody. And if anybody has any additional questions, we would be more than happy to answer them. Awesome. All right, I think we're good with that, Sydney.
Okay.
Do we want to throw up the final slide on our deck that has our contact information? Awesome. So to just wrap up the webinar today, thank you everybody to everyone who came here to listen and listen to us talk about Workplace Charging 101. Thank you to our presenters that were able to join us and provide the utilities perspective, but also the installation perspective. We just wanted to add our contact information here. We are the Workplace Charging Coaches, so Peggy in Vermont, John and Jessica in New Hampshire, and then myself here in Maine. If you are a workplace that is interested in charging and aren't sure where to start, or you know where to start and just need some extra help or guidance, we are going to be your go-to contacts for facilitating these conversations. No question is a bad question, so don't feel silly for asking. And yeah, start the conversations now, and we look forward to working with you all. So thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.